The wind moved softly across the open desert, carrying with it the smell of rain and dust. It was evening when Rhett Callahan, a tired cowboy with lines of time carved deep into his face, rode his old brown horse along the empty road toward El Paso. The sun was sinking behind the distant hills, painting the sky orange and gold. Rhett had been traveling for days with no real destination, just moving, as if the road itself could wash away the weight he carried inside. Rhett was not young anymore. His hands were rough, his voice low, and his eyes told the story of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. He had once owned land, a herd, and hope, but that life was gone now, taken by a single night years ago that he never talked about. People said Rhett was a good man, but even good men can have ghosts following them. His ghost rode beside him that evening, silent and heavy. As the sky darkened, lightning began to flash far away. Rhett needed shelter before the storm broke. He saw a faint light in the distance, a small inn standing alone at the edge of the desert. It looked old, with a wooden porch and a single swinging sign that said, Marisol's Rest Stop. He guided his horse toward it, rain starting to fall in thin lines that turned the ground to mud. When Rhett reached the porch, a woman stepped out to greet him. She was Marisol, the owner. She looked to be in her 30s, her dark hair tied back, her face kind but worn from hard work. There was something quiet about her, something almost fragile yet strong at the same time. Rhett tipped his hat and asked softly if she had a room. She nodded, wiping her hands on a cloth wrapped around her right arm. Rhett noticed the cloth immediately. It was deep red, faded at the edges, and wound tightly from her wrist to her elbow. He thought perhaps she had hurt herself but said nothing. Inside, the inn was small but warm. A fire burned in the hearth, filling the air with the scent of wood smoke. There were only 3 tables, a few old chairs, and a counter where a small lantern glowed. Rhett took off his wet hat, placed it on the table, and thanked her for the shelter. Marisol smiled faintly but avoided his eyes. She moved slowly, as though each motion cost her effort. Rhett noticed her wincing once or twice as she used her right arm. After he had eaten a bowl of soup and some bread, Rhett sat near the fire to dry his coat. The storm outside had grown fierce. Thunder rolled like the sound of hooves across the desert, and rain beat against the windows. Marisol was cleaning the counter when Rhett spoke again. "You all alone out here?" he asked gently. She nodded. "It's been just me for a while," she said, her voice soft but steady. "No family?" Marisol looked at the flames for a long moment. "Not anymore." Rhett didn't press further. He knew the tone of loss when he heard it. He had spoken it himself many times. Later, when the fire burned low and the night had settled deep, Rhett noticed a small stain of red on Marisol's cloth bandage. It seemed fresh. He stood up. "Ma'am," he said kindly, "that arm of yours looks like it's bleeding through. You ought to let me help. I've fixed plenty of wounds before." Marisol froze, her eyes filled with sudden fear, not pain. She shook her head quickly. "No, please," she said. "Don't take the cloth off." "It's fine." Her voice was trembling, almost desperate. Rhett frowned, puzzled. "I'm only trying to help," he said softly. "If it's hurtin', I can wrap it better." But she stepped back, clutching her arm protectively. "Please," she whispered again, "don't take it off." There was something in her tone that stopped Rhett. It wasn't anger, it was sorrow. Like the cloth was more than a bandage. Like it was a memory she couldn't bear to lose. He nodded slowly. "All right," he said, backing away. "I'll mind my own." The tension eased from her shoulders a little. She thanked him quietly and went upstairs to check his room. When she returned, she carried a small lantern and told him he could rest for the night. Her arm trembled slightly as she handed him the key, but her face stayed calm. Rhett wished her good night and climbed the narrow stairs. His room was simple, a wooden bed, a small window, and a cracked mirror. He sat down listening to the rain, but sleep didn't come easily. Something about that woman and her red cloth lingered in his mind. The way she had begged him not to touch it. It wasn't normal fear. It was deeper, personal, like the cloth hid something sacred or painful beyond words. Downstairs, Marisol sat by the dying fire, holding her wrapped arm close. She whispered a prayer under her breath, the same one she had said every night for years. The cloth was her secret, her shield. Underneath it lay a scar she had carried since childhood, one that tied her to a man she had never met but could never forget. She didn't know that man was sleeping just above her that very night. Rhett dreamed restlessly. He saw flashes of fire, the sound of a gun, a shadowed figure running through smoke. He woke with sweat on his brow, heart racing. It was the same dream that had followed him for more than a decade. He rose and went to the window. The rain had stopped, but thunder still rumbled far away. The moonlight shone over the desert, making it look endless and empty, like his life. He thought of Marisol again. Something about her calm sadness drew him in. He wondered what she had lost, what she was hiding. People in the desert didn't talk much, but their silence said everything. He decided he would thank her properly in the morning and maybe stay a day longer, help fix the broken fence outside, maybe even bring her supplies from town. It had been a long time since he had cared about anyone's burden but his own. Morning came with soft light. The air smelled clean after the storm. Rhett went downstairs to find Marisol already awake, sweeping the porch. The red cloth was still tied around her arm, but now the fabric looked even darker, as though stained deeper overnight. He offered her coffee and she smiled faintly, her eyes still avoiding his. "You sleep all right?" she asked. "Well enough," Rhett said. "That rain could have washed the desert clean." "It needed to," she said. Then after a pause, "Sometimes we all do." Rhett looked at her curiously. "You sound like you've had your share of storms." Marisol gave a small, sad smile. "Some storms never leave, Mr. Callahan. They just change shape." He admired her calm strength. But as she turned to go inside, the cloth on her arm caught on a nail from the porch post. The fabric tore slightly, revealing a small patch of scarred skin beneath. Rhett saw it only for a moment before she pulled the cloth back quickly, wrapping it tight again. But what he saw made his breath hitch, a faint mark like the edge of a burned symbol. It looked familiar, though he couldn't place it. Marisol's face went pale. "Please," she said quickly, "forget what you saw." Rhett raised his hands gently. "I meant no harm, ma'am," she nodded, her voice trembling. "It's not you, it's everything that came before." That day passed slowly. Rhett offered to help around the inn, mending the fence and fetching water from the well. Marisol worked beside him, quiet but grateful. At times he caught her looking at him, as though searching his face for something she couldn't name. There was a strange pull between them, something unspoken that neither could understand. By sunset, they shared supper again. Rhett told small stories from the trail, safe stories about horses and dust and sunsets. Marisol listened, smiling a little more each time. For the first time in years, she felt warmth returning to her life. But the past has a way of finding those who try to hide from it. As night deepened once more, Rhett noticed her arm shaking again. The cloth had loosened from all her work, and he could see the edges of the scar beneath, darker now in the lamplight. "Marisol," he said gently, "you're hurting yourself keeping that thing wrapped so tight. Let me help you clean it." She looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's not just a scar. It's my story. And it's the reason I can't ever go home." Rhett's heart softened. "We all got reasons," he said quietly. "But sometimes you can't heal what you won't face." She shook her head, tears forming. "If you take it off, everything will change." The words hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Outside, the wind began to rise again. The old inn creaked under its breath. Rhett took a slow step closer, his eyes kind but steady. "Marisol," he said, "whatever's under that cloth, it can't be worse than what you're carrying inside." For a long time, she didn't move. Then, as if trusting him against her better judgment, she lowered her eyes. "Please," she said softly, "don't take the cloth off." But Rhett's hand was already reaching, not out of curiosity, but compassion. He wanted to help, to ease her pain. The lantern light flickered as his fingers brushed the fabric. It was warm, soft, worn smooth from years of being tied. He hesitated, hearing her quiet sob, but his heart told him the truth was kinder than silence. Slowly, gently, he began to untie the cloth. The room was quiet except for the soft crackle of the lantern flame. Rhett's hands trembled slightly as he touched the edge of the red cloth. Marisol stood before him, eyes closed, tears sliding down her cheeks. He could hear her shallow breathing, quick and frightened, like a small bird trapped in a storm. He wanted to tell her to calm down, to promise that everything would be all right. But something deep inside him warned that once the truth was shown, life would never be the same for either of them. Still, he kept untying the fabric slowly, gently, as if unwrapping years of pain. When the cloth finally fell away, Rhett's breath caught. On her arm was a scar, old, pale, and shaped like a brand, the mark of a ranch that no longer existed. The sight of it made his chest tighten. It was the Callahan Ranch brand, his family's mark, burned into her skin long ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Rhett stepped back, eyes wide, heart pounding. The lantern light flickered against the walls, and he could almost hear the echoes of his past. Shouts, confusion, the crackle of a fire from a night long gone. He shook his head, not wanting to believe what he saw. "How do you have that mark?" he whispered. Marisol opened her eyes slowly. Her face was calm now, almost peaceful, though her tears kept falling. "Because your name, Mr. Callahan," she said softly, "has followed me my whole life." Rhett stared, speechless. Memories rushed through him. His father, the ranch, the night he had lost everything. He had been young, proud, and too quick to trust what others told him. That night he had believed he was defending his land from thieves. He remembered the confusion, the shouting, and how the fire had spread. He remembered riding away, never looking back. Now standing in front of him was the daughter of the man who had lived through that fire. Marisol's voice broke the silence. "You don't remember me, but I remember you. I was just a little girl that night. You came with others thinking my father had stolen your cattle, but he hadn't. He was trying to save them from the storm. When the barn burned, he shielded me. The fire touched my arm before he could get me out. This mark is what I've carried ever since." Rhett's knees weakened. He reached for a chair and sat down slowly. His face went pale and his eyes filled with disbelief. "I didn't know," he said, his voice rough. "I swear to you, I didn't know what really happened. They told me your father had—" Marisol nodded gently. "I know, that's what people said. And I spent years hating you, wanting to see your face just once. I thought it would make the pain go away. But when I saw you walk through that door last night, tired and quiet, I couldn't hate you anymore. You looked like someone who'd been carrying the same pain I had." The words hit Rhett like a wave. He bowed his head, his hat slipping from his hands. "I've spent every day trying to forget that night," he whispered. "I thought leaving would bury the guilt. But it followed me everywhere I went." Marisol's expression softened. "Pain doesn't leave until we look at it," she said quietly. "That's what I've learned." For a long time they sat in silence. The lantern flame swayed in the soft breeze sneaking through the window, making shadows dance on the walls. Outside, the desert was calm again, the air still and gentle after the storm. Rhett finally looked up at her. "Why didn't you tell me right away who you were?" Marisol sighed. "Because I didn't want to hurt you. I thought maybe it was enough to know you were still human, kind even after everything. But when you saw the cloth, I panicked. It's been my way of hiding from the world, not just the scar, but the story that comes with it." Rhett nodded slowly. He understood. People like them didn't just hide their wounds, they lived inside them. After a while, Rhett stood and went to the small window. He stared at the desert where the morning sun had begun to touch the horizon. "I wish I could go back," he said softly. "I wish I could change that night." Marisol came closer. "You can't," she said, "but you can stop running from it. You can make peace with it." He turned to her, eyes filled with regret. "How can you forgive something like that?" Marisol looked at the red cloth in her hands. "Because forgiveness isn't saying it didn't happen," she said. "It's saying I don't want it to rule my heart anymore." Her words were simple, but they carried a strength that Rhett hadn't felt in years. He took a slow breath. "You're stronger than I ever was," he said. Marisol smiled faintly. "No, Mr. Callahan. We just learned our lessons in different ways." They spent the next hours talking, truly talking, and for the first time. Rhett told her about how he lost the ranch after his father passed, how guilt made him leave everything behind. Marisol shared how she rebuilt her life, traveling from town to town until she bought this little inn. She said she wrapped her arm every day, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't want people asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. The sun climbed higher, filling the room with golden light. It made the red cloth glow like a ribbon of memory between them, a reminder of the pain that had once divided two lives, now quietly weaving them together. Rhett felt something in his chest shift. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was release, the kind that comes when a burden finally starts to lift. "Marisol," he said softly, "you've given me something I didn't think I'd ever have again." She looked up, curious. "What's that?" "Peace," he said. "Or maybe a chance at it." Marisol smiled, tears shining in her eyes. Then it was worth it, she whispered. That afternoon, Rhett helped her fix the broken fence behind the inn. The desert air was cool and clean, and for the first time in years he felt his hands working with purpose. Marisol stood nearby, holding the board steady. They didn't talk much, they didn't need to. Every glance and quiet smile said what words couldn't. When the sun began to set again, turning the desert pink and gold, Rhett sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. Marisol joined him, her arm now loosely wrapped with a fresh cloth, not to hide it, but to protect it. You ever think of leaving this place? Rhett asked. Sometimes, she said, but it's not the place that matters. It's what you carry with you. Rhett nodded slowly. I carried the wrong things for too long. Marisol looked at him thoughtfully. Then maybe it's time you carried something better. Maybe start with forgiveness and for yourself. He smiled faintly. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, she said, but it's worth it. Night fell softly over the desert. The stars came out one by one, bright and clear. Rhett leaned back, listening to the quiet. For the first time in years, it wasn't an empty quiet. It was peaceful. He realized he had found something here he didn't even know he was searching for. Understanding. As the days passed, Rhett stayed at the inn, helping Marisol repair old things. Fences, doors, a leaky roof. Every small task seemed to mend a part of his own heart, too. Marisol began to laugh again, a sound she hadn't heard from herself in years, and Rhett, who had once believed his story was over, began to imagine a new chapter. One evening, as they watched another sunset paint the sky, Marisol said quietly, I used to think that scar ruined my life, but maybe it saved me. It brought you here, didn't it? Rhett nodded. Maybe it did. He reached out, carefully taking her hand. She didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, two people bound by the past, finally finding peace in the present. When Rhett finally decided to leave, it wasn't out of running. It was out of peace. He packed his small bag, saddled his horse, and stood before Marisol one last time. You sure you want to go? She asked gently. I need to, he said, smiling softly. But I'll come back. There's work still to do and coffee I haven't finished. Marisol laughed. Then I'll keep the pot warm. He looked at her one last time, the wind brushing through his hair, the sun rising behind him. Thank you, he said. For what? She asked. For forgiving me before I ever asked you to, he replied. Marisol's eyes glistened. Sometimes forgiveness finds us when we stop hiding, she said. Rhett rode off toward the horizon, the morning light golden on his face. He felt lighter than he had in years. The desert stretched before him, wide, endless, and full of promise. Behind him, the small inn stood quietly, a red cloth hanging from the porch rail like a flag of peace fluttering in the breeze. And somewhere deep inside both their hearts, the past finally rested.